think we are nearly complete now. So I think I start with my presentation. And um, what is a Log Explorer? Well, you might all know the problem. If you have got a web server with your shop, then this server produces a lot of log messages, access logs, error logs, and so on. And it's quite difficult to keep track of all these log messages and notice the important messages or look for special messages, analyze these log files, and so on. And this is even worse if you have not only one web server, but maybe two or more, and load balancer logs, and so on. So this can be very hard to keep track of the really important log messages and to always have a look at them. So this is the problem we tried to solve for our customers with the new tool, the Log Explorer. The ScaleCommerce Log Explorer has all log files in one place. They are available via web browser, and you can filter and search through all the log entries. And the very nice thing is this is very, very quick. I will demonstrate that in a couple of minutes. You can create dashboards to have graphs or tables with the most important information of your log files. And you also can create multiple user accounts for this tool. And before I start showing you the tool, I just want to mention that, of course, you can ask questions and you can also raise your hand in this Zoom webinar. But I would like to suggest that you collect your questions and that at the very end we have a question and answer session, and then I can also allow some people to speak and to be heard by others, and then we can answer questions. You can also use the chat function of Zoom, or even if there are some questions after the webinar, you might just drop us an email to support@scale.sc. So as I said, there are quite a lot of useful features, and yeah, let's have a look at it. I will just demonstrate and show you what the Log Explorer can do. So I'm very thankful to some of our customers who allowed me to demonstrate the Log Explorer on their actual project. For example, this is from our customer Bob Shop, and I will just show you how the Log Explorer works here. If you log in and you already have created the dashboard, then you will see the dashboard. I will come to this back later and show you what this is and how to create. I will first of all show you the basic features. And the basic feature is the Explore view. And as you already can see in this Explore view, here you have Apache access entries. And on the one hand, you can just see how many entries there are. This is in a time range of 1 hour, and you can see there are more than 60,000 entries by this time. And you can also switch to, for example, Apache error logs, or you can see Nginx access logs, or you can see Nginx error logs. These are the 4 log types by now we have in our projects. But as I will show you later, you can also integrate whatever you want from log files. So let's have a look at the basic view, at the Explore view. As you can see, here are some columns, but these are not all available columns. You can configure these columns by this button, and you see settings. So you can see there are some more columns available, an ID column, a remote log name, a user ID column. In most cases, you will not be interested or will not need these information. So I just moved them to the available columns, but I can just move the ID field, for example, and you can already see it's immediately there. You can see this UUID column, which is not very useful in the log files, but we need it for the tables. So I just want to show you and to demonstrate that you easily can configure this table as you want. Just move these columns and immediately you only see the columns you choose for viewable columns. And you also can configure the width of the columns, as you might already have seen. For example, the ID field is a bit longer as we can see it now. So I make it just 300, yeah, and then we can see the full column. So this you can just build as you need it. I will switch back and remove the ID, but I would like to see the method, the size, and the request, of course. And this is the one thing, as you can just keep track of the log file entries, and you can also switch to real time, which means that it's updated, I think, each 30 seconds or 60 seconds, not sure. And you can also, and this is of course one of the really important features, you can search through these log entries, and you can do that just by SQL language. So you can do something like status is 404, and then you can see you have only entries with the status 404. And of course, you can combine this. You can also say something like, let me see what makes sense. I'm not sure. I just copy an IP address. And so I could also do something like, and IP is this. And I search, and then we only have the entries of this IP address. And as you might already have noticed, this is really, really quick. I mean, there are, when I delete this again, and I could just switch to 7 days, and then you can see there are already 11 million, 11.5 million entries in this table. But searching, for example, the status just takes you 37 milliseconds. So this is really, really quick, and this makes searching through log files very, very comfortable. And you also can save these searches. I've already done this with some stuff. For example, I saved a search which just says request is like checkout. So this means in the request field, somewhere there is the string checkout. And then I get all requests and all log entries about this request with containing checkout. Or I saved something bots with redirects. So this is a query which says status is not 200 and user agent is like bot somewhere. And then you can see that I will just remove the referrer field to make the other field bigger so we can see the user agent a bit better. So then you can see these are all BingBot entries, and they all get a status of 307 and some other 301 and so on. So these are requests which are redirected, and maybe it's useful to have a look at them and see why they are redirected and if this is really necessary, because it creates not needed traffic, for example. So this is just an example. Another query I saved is status is not 200. So you can see which pages are redirected or not found and so on and so on. This is just to give you an idea of the possibilities of this tool. And this is very, very useful. And also, of course, you can look through Apache error messages. We don't get any result because the query of this input is always kept when you switch between the tables. And sometimes it's very useful because, for example, if you search for a special IP address, this is in the IP field is in all the tables, then you can just switch between the tables and between the log type and can see what entries are there for a special IP. I have also some stored queries here. For example, Pdu exceptions. I just set up a query saying error message is like Pdu exception, and then you can see all the Pdu exceptions, and we immediately can see that there may be a problem here because we get some PHP fatal errors with max connect timeout. So this is probably a good idea to have a look at this at some point. And this is how it mainly works. You can switch between the tables and the log types, and then you can search through it, and you can save searches and look at them. And also you can create dashboards, as we already saw at the beginning when I logged in, with several widgets. And I just, for example, created a few widgets. Maybe we make this a little bit bigger. For example, this is a widget just counting IP addresses. And so you can see also, depending on time range, which are the most used IP addresses. And maybe some IP addresses will be a bit suspicious because there are so many requests, and you can very easily find out which they are. Or here I created a widget with PHP errors. So for one day in this case, you can see 27 times this error appeared. It's the Pdu exception again with the max connect timeout. And so you can easily, day by day or whatever, or once a month or whatever, you can see which are the most appearing PHP errors and which should I be aware of and work on to get rid of them. And I also created a widget with bots, and you can see in this project the Bing bot is very, very active. What did we have? One day, okay, 20,000 requests per day by the Bing bot, and then another is what is this? Google Ads bot, Google Mobile, and so on and so on. These widgets can be created easily on this menu item. So you just say create widget, and you just name it somehow, and then you can decide which type of widget you want, a donut or a pie graph or just a counter sum or a table. And then you choose which table this widget should regard to, and you can choose the columns and the order and some filter query you want, and that's all. And then you click add new, and in the dashboard you can add new widgets or delete widgets, whatever you want. And you can create multiple dashboards. For example, you could create a special dashboard focusing on errors, or another dashboard focusing on suspicious URLs and IPs, and so on and so on. So this might be very helpful. The other menu items here are the database, which is actually, if it's set up once, then you will not need to change anything here. But for example, if you choose to implement some other log files, I will come to this back in a few minutes, how this could work and what's under the hood here. Then you might have to select another table here, and maybe you have to edit the table and update some fields or whatever. This might get clearer when I tell you how the Log Explorer actually works. And I come back to my presentation sheets now. And what's under the hood? How does it work? On the one hand, we use rsyslogd for streaming the log messages to the Log Explorer node. We choose to use this because it's very easy and it's working by default. I mean, Apache and Nginx can very easily stream their messages by syslog. On the Log Explorer node, we installed a software called Vector, I will tell a bit more about this later, but mainly it's a software for receiving log messages, modifying them if needed, parsing them, and then input them in some other database, whatever. For this, we use, for the parsing, we use grok patterns. I will also show that in a couple of minutes. And we insert the parsed data into ClickHouse server. A few minutes ago, before we started this session, I already put some links on the Facebook event page where we announced this webinar. You might have a look there to see the links to all these tools, but I also will show them at the end of this session. Why we use ClickHouse? Well, ClickHouse is an enormously quick tool to collect huge amounts of data and search for data. As you have already seen, when I did some filtering, some search in the table of Apache access logs, 11 million entries, and I can do a like search with wildcards before and after the search term, and it still is very, very quick. And this is the reason why we choose ClickHouse. The Log Explorer itself, the UI, is a Symfony application, very simply done. And this is mainly how it works. As I said, vector, well, we could do a whole workshop and not only a webinar about vector because it's a very, very powerful tool, but also a bit not very easily to understand. It took a couple of days for me to understand how it works and how we can parse our log files. The parsing is needed because, of course, you have the log message is containing all the information, the IP address, referrer, request, and so on in one line, but we want to have it in separated fields for make that searchable. And I will just give you an impression how this looks and works from configuration. So as I said, on the Log Explorer node, there is running this software called Vector, and the configuration can be found in this directory. And as you see, there are lots of TOML files here, and some of them are important for all the log files. So this is the all logs TOML, and some keep the configuration for the special log type, for example, Apache Access. And there is a third one, which is also responsible for all the log messages. It's the vector TOML. And the idea behind vector, I can show you in a minute. You can find that on vector.dev. And the main idea is that it has three components. One regarding sources, so input, and one component, the most important component, is the transforms component, where you can modify and filter and parse log messages. And the third component is the things, which is to input the output of the transforms into some database, which can be Elasticsearch, Prometheus, S3, or ClickHouse as we used it. And this configuration, I just give you a short view on this, looks like this. Here you have the input defined, which is just listening on the port 1025, where we send our syslog messages to, and the type is syslog. And then here you have a filter, a transforms component. As I said, this is the middle component. This is just to prevent, for example, the Log Explorer its own syslog messages to be inserted here because we are not interested in that. We only want the app servers and the master and so on. And this is the field modifier is a component to, for example, delete some components, some fields from the log message, from the syslog message, and so on and so on. I will not explain this in detail, just to give you an impression. And we also, as example, we have a look at the Apache access toml. This is again a filter which gets only messages where the app name field contains Apache access, which is defined in our syslog configuration. And then the remap component is for parsing the stuff. This is the parse grok method, and as you can see, here is some pattern to parse the Apache access logs. So I just show you this because this will be needed to be built if you want to use some different log files, not only Apache and Nginx access and error logs, but maybe some shop log files or whatever. This can be done, and you could use this as an example how it could be done. And last but not least, the component was the sinks. No, that was wrong. Sorry. Not all logs. I want this one. Oh, it's this one. Here we have sinks for the different log file types, Apache access, error, and so on. And this is just a prepared sink, prepared module for ClickHouse. And you just have to fill in the address of the ClickHouse server and password and so on. So this is mainly how it works. And what is missing? The first point I could just strike out a couple of minutes before we started, because this was implemented today, the stored filters, as I already showed you, the possibility to store some queries you already did. And what we will implement in a couple of days will be some possibility to export log files in different formats. And we will build some more flexible widgets because by now it's mainly a sort of counter which is possible, as you might have seen when we have a look at the dashboard again. It's always a count of some special filtered queries or whatever. And there are maybe use cases where we need some more flexible widgets. We are on that as well. And of course, as I said already, the integration of some individual log files, for example, Shopware, Oxid, Magento, whatever log files, or some log files of payment modules, whatever. This is all possible, but needs some more work. One of the most important thing I want to tell you is that this tool is open source, so you can find it on GitHub on this address, github.com open source commerce /log explorer. And please feel free to join and contribute. This does not have to mean that you develop some stuff for it, but it could also be very helpful if you, for example, can make suggestions for new functions, and you can write issues on the GitHub page. Just show you, this is the GitHub page, and here is an issues item, and you can do some suggestions, or you can report bugs, whatever, and this also would be very helpful. But of course, it would be very, very exciting if some of you are willing to also develop some stuff for the Log Explorer so it can get better and better by all of you. And so this would mean you can fork it, and you can do some pull requests if you do some new features or bug fixes or whatever. And that would be very nice if you would contribute. Um, any questions? Yeah, we can do a short break, and if you have any questions, I just see that there is a chat message. Let me have a look. Yeah, alerting is also already an issue we have planned. So this will also come recently. Um, exactly as you said, Olaf, it will be something like this. You will be able to define some threshold of messages in a certain time range, and then if it's getting above the threshold, then an alert will be thrown, and you will get an email, whatever. Any other questions? I would give you some time. If you have questions, just write them into the chat or in the F&A. Yes, there's some. How would multi-line messages look like, for example, is tag trace? Yeah, good question, Simon. Um, as I said, we did that. We didn't do that yet. You may think about, for example, Oxid, the Oxid exception log, which is a multi-line log. And this is possible, but then the parsing gets a bit more complicated. So we will have to fiddle around with this. But this is also a thing you can help with, actually. It's definitely possible, but we didn't implement it yet. But we will, certainly, because that's, of course, also for our customers, that's an important feature. Any more questions? What is needed? Yeah, what is needed to have it running? I will come to that in a minute. Just let's see. Why did you choose to develop this and not use, for example, Greylock? um, we do use Greylock in some projects, but we found it always a pain in the ass to configure Greylock and to get it really smooth running. And also Greylock eats up lots of resources. And this solution doesn't need really much resources. The default Log Explorer node will have 2 CPU cores and 4 GB of RAM. And this works very smoothly. And also, I think by now we have 50 GB of hard disk space, which is by now is not used half. So it's very you can use this with very little resources. So another question: how to handle multiple log files per host node? For example, if you have log files for each host separately. Yeah, that's a good question as well. We will have to have a look at this. Um, Actually, by now, this will already work, but the log files of several vhosts, will be merged into one Apache Access table. And I think this is not a problem at all as long as we have a separate field for the vhost. And this has to be implemented. It's not there yet, but we can do this, of course. And then it would look like this, and you will just have another column which contains the vhost. And then I think that's solved. Okay. Having a look at the clock, I will continue. If you have more questions, don't bother, just write them into the F&A section or in the chat. I will come to that after the next few slides. Here are the links again. As I already said, you can also find them on our Facebook page on the event section for this webinar. I wrote them there. And if you want more of our tools and what we plan next and so on, I would suggest that you subscribe to our Facebook page if not already done. You might also subscribe for our newsletter. have a look at our open source projects on osc.dev, because also the Log Explorer is mentioned there and some other projects we already have or are planning. You might also follow us on Twitter. And yeah, that's it mainly. And just have a look if there are some more questions. Cannot see any. So I would say that's it for today. Thank you very much for taking part. If you have any more questions afterwards, then as I said, don't bother, just write us an email to support@scale.sc. Any more question? No. Right. Yeah, then I'm done. Thank you very much. And for all of our customers, if you want to use Log Explorer, the newest projects already have the Log Explorer because we automated it in our setup. But the older projects do not have Log Explorer yet, but you can have it very, very quickly if you want. It might be an effort of maybe an hour, not more, and then we can implement Log Explorer into your setup. And of course, it's, as I said, it's open source. It's not only for ScaleCommerce customers. Everybody can use it. But of course, then you will also have a bit of work to get ClickHouse running. Well, that's quite easy, but with vector, the vector stuff. If you need help with this and with the patterns, the grok patterns for parsing the stuff, I will put some examples into the README of the Log Explorer on GitHub in the next days, I would say. So then you will also find in this README, you will find some examples for parsing log files, which will probably help you to get it running on your own server as well. Thank you very much and goodbye.